Hi, I'm Mina Chow. I'm adjunct professor at USC School of Architecture and interdisciplinary faculty, and you are listening to US Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. I'm Tom Guild. There's a new edition of the popular book Midcentury Houses Today. And today we'll talk about it with co-author and architectural photographer Michael Biondo. Next up, someone we greatly admire for keeping modernist houses on the radar in Los Angeles, filmmaker Russell Brown, founder of Fort LA, also known as Friends of Residential Treasures. Later on, music from Durham, North Carolina's Sharp 9 Jazz Club, with pianist Lenore Raphael and guitarist Howard Alden. And now, your host, Mr. Modernism, George Smart.
Hey, thanks, Tom. We'll talk soon with Russell Brown about Fort, the organization he started in Los Angeles. But what, dear listener, about you? A lot of you live in places where there's no Fort, no U.S. Modernist, no Docomomo, or any of the other established organizations working in modernism. All around America, there are thousands of small and medium towns with modernist houses by architects that were never famous, never published in national magazines. At best, their work might have made the local newspaper, back when towns had newspapers. These journeymen and journeywomen admired the greats like Wright and Lautner and Schindler and Gropius and Corbusier and Mies. But in a small town, say under 70,000, there just aren't that many clients for modernism. If they were lucky, they maybe got to design 2 or 3 houses in their entire careers, and one of these was likely for themselves or their family members. What's more, these houses by unsung architects were often pretty great. Yet, as the decades went by, their names are forgotten. Their work becomes that strange house down the street, which no one understands or knows anything about, 3 or 5 or 7 owners later, and the realtors who don't know any better are happy to advertise these modernist houses as teardowns. Which brings me back to you. If you're in one of these towns, somewhere that has never done much documentation on modernist houses, perhaps you're thinking, surely some architects are already working on this, or some students, or some university. Probably not. Perhaps you're thinking that starting up a list takes a special degree or training or certification. Perhaps you're thinking you need to get permission from some city committee. No, the answer to this is all no. All it takes is you, a cell phone, and a car, and a laptop. Just start driving around, taking photos from the street. Note the addresses, go home, pour yourself a drink, and enter all that into your laptop. A couple of these trips, and you'll be the town expert in modernism. I'm completely serious. That's all it takes to get started in documentation. And once you share this information, that's the beginning of your town's modernist revival. It's how I did it back in 2007, and you can do it too. It could not be easier. If you want help, just call or email. I am glad to assist. My phone number is on every page of usmodernist.org. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by June Goldfinger and Jeff Taylor, sponsors of Circle, Square, Triangle, a traveling exhibition on the architecture of Myron Goldfinger, and by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Los Angeles, Palm Springs, and Malibu.
Michael Biondo is a New York and Connecticut-based photographer who specializes in architectural, interior, and fine art. A graduate of Darien High School.
Go Blue Wave.
And Pratt.
Go Cannoneers.
He spent 20 years in entertainment and fashion working for Giorgio Armani, Neiman Marcus, Saks Fifth Avenue, Valentino, W Magazine, Elle Magazine, Interview Magazine, and Sony Music, not a magazine. He switched his focus to architectural photography in 2009 and has contributed to many books such as Alan Greenberg, Classical Architect, and Midcentury Houses Today. Welcome, Michael.
Well, wow. It's good to know that you've done your homework.
And this is your first podcast, right?
That's right. I'm very nervous. I hope it works out okay.
You're doing great. So here's my first question. Growing up in Darien, Michael, did you ever sneak over to the famous Smith House designed by Richard Meyer?
No. It's only recently that I've been to the Smith House. But very close to the Smith House, we used to sneak over on Contentment Island and pitch tents and camp out in the summertime.
Okay. Teenagers having parties?
Teenagers having parties, that's right.
What a great place to do it on an island.
It was unbelievable. It was really incredible.
You visited the Smith House recently. What was that for?
Well, let's see. Most recently, it was for the Iconic Houses tour event. And prior to that, I was invited over by the real estate broker to visit the house and photograph the house, when it was on the market.
It had been in the Smith family for a long time.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the house has been sold yet or if it's still on the market, but yeah, it's an incredible piece of architecture.
You can look that up on our website at usmodernist.org/Meyer, Meier. Now, Michael, you started out in fashion and entertainment photography. How did you switch to architecture?
Well, I kind of fell into fashion, entertainment-related photography. It was kind of, I backed into that career. It wasn't necessarily a conscious decision. And I think when I grew up, finally, I realized that architecture and interior design was a better fit for me.
Probably a little less dramatic.
You weren't one of those paparazzi, were you?
No.
He was in the sophisticated crowd doing work in studios.
That's right.
You were invited. Okay.
I was one of them uppity photographers.
Who did you get to meet that was famous?
Oh, geez. I met and worked for a lot of really famous people. At Interview, I photographed everyone from Ed Harris to Morgan Freeman to Public Enemy to a whole host of famous folks.
But something about architecture really drew you in. Was there a particular house or a shot or a photographer that precipitated all this?
I think it was really just the formal qualities of architecture, the shapes, the forms, the textures. My first love was really landscape photography and minor white in particular. And so the closest analogy to that kind of fine art photography is, architecture.
And you've done some amazing work photographing houses around New Canaan, Connecticut, which is a real epicenter for modernist residences. And there's a book your photography was featured in called Midcentury Houses Today. When did that come out?
Let's see, that came out, I believe, in 2016, and we're actually just wrapping up the final bits for a second edition of that book that'll be published next year.
Oh, awesome. Now, what kind of revisions are going to be in it?
Well, there's going to be some swapping around of houses, mostly, and some refinements in terms of the editing of some of the text.
Some people who are into architecture have heard about New Canaan for Philip Johnson's Glass House, but there are a couple of dozen architects who have magnificent homes there as well. Who are some of the other architects whose houses you've photographed?
Oh, gee. In New Canaan in particular, you'd have to, of course, Philip Johnson, but Elliot Noyes really comes to the top of mind when I think of, New Canaan architecture, because, a lot of people didn't realize this, but Elliot Noyes was the first architect to move to New Canaan. And he was considered, I think, even Philip Johnson called him the lodestar that drew Marcel Breuer and John Johansson and John Blackley and who else? Gee, there was a whole bunch of just incredible architects that came to New Canaan in his wake. Fortunately, I've had a chance to photograph all of houses by all those architects. So I think I've photographed maybe 30 or 40 houses in New Canaan.
Now, your photography really does do a great job of capturing the houses and the landscape that you love. For instance, the photos of the Lee House are really stunning, and part of that is the autumn landscape. So did you have to wait for that house until the fall, or did you just get lucky one day?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I'd like to say that, we planned a whole year to do that photo shoot, but it was something that was in the works, and it was a particularly great color that fall. And the homeowner was open to me photographing the house at that time, which, access is really 9/10 of the battle.
Yeah.
And so it was a little bit of everything. But, once you saw the color on that day and the way the light was, you just had to sort of embrace it.
So it could have been a double wide and it still would have looked pretty.
I think so.
But not as good.
Yes.
Yeah. But a really beautifully lit double wide. Yeah, exactly.
What's fun is that I live not far from New Canaan. I live in a town adjacent to New Canaan. So all these houses are about maybe a 10, 15-minute drive. And when I was doing that book, I actually even rode my bicycle to a photo shoot with my camera in the basket and my tripod strapped to my back. So I think that's the only photo shoot that I've ever been able to ride my bicycle to. But one of the other houses that I really loved in that book was John Johansson's Warner House, which was also referred to as Villa Ponte. And it's a house built over a river. And that house I was able to photograph in the middle of a snowstorm, which was really amazing. And that was a little bit planned with the homeowner. We said, we knew that we were going to need to photograph the house in the winter. And I said, if there's a snowstorm coming, can I call you up at the last minute and come over and shoot? And they said, yeah. And sure enough, snowstorm came and I called them up and I went over and shot.
That is a gorgeous house. U.S. Modernist has hosted a brunch there a couple of years back. And it's just extraordinary to watch the water go underneath the living room.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
Is there like a glass bottom like those boats in Florida?
No, nothing quite like that.
Okay.
But it's a pretty good size bridge across that water, which they wouldn't let you do today. You can't build anything over water anymore.
When was it built?
What was that, about 52? Is that right, Michael?
I think it was early 50s, early to mid 50s.
Okay, so before we had seat belts.
Right. Or we used them, right.
Wow. In a snowstorm, huh?
Yep.
Yeah, that's a gorgeous photo.
I was actually able to get into the river. Good thing I had waders with me, and I was able to get into the river and photograph from the river's perspective of the house as it cantilevered over the river.
So everyone tells me that iPhones and iPads are so advanced now, they're almost as good as real professional cameras. Is that true or just marketing?
Well, I'd say I think it's true.
Well, they're really good point-and-shoot cameras.
Yeah.
Well, if you think about it, I'm not sure if this statistic is correct, but I think Apple has manufactured more cameras through their phone operation. They've manufactured more cameras than all the camera manufacturers in the world combined, I think, over all time.
I
believe that.
I never thought of that, but I'll bet you're right.
So if you think of the R&D resources of Apple Computer, which is pretty substantial, and the fact that they're really scaling for a market that is so large, they can afford to develop, some of the computational photography that they're doing. I think I could shoot a job with an iPhone, definitely.
Yeah, it's really amazing. Now, you also do video. You did a film about Bassam Fellows, a design firm based there in New Canaan.
Right. They're actually based in an adjacent town called in Ridgefield.
Okay.
And their own home is actually in New Canaan. So, yeah, they're New Canaan guys. They're fantastic. They have that wonderful Schlumberger Research Center.
Which is their offices and showroom.
Right. That's the old Philip Johnson. It was his first, I believe, commercial building designed for the Schlumberger Corporation, which is the oil facilities company that was, at one point, they had their tech center, research center in Ridgefield, Connecticut. They commissioned Philip Johnson because he had designed homes for the Schlumberger family, including one would be the Boissonnas house and I think another house in the south of France. So he was close with the family, and they commissioned him to do. Yeah, they commissioned him to do the tech center for them, the executive offices. And when Schlumberger left, I believe they donated the property to the town of Ridgefield. Somehow the town of Ridgefield ended up in possession of the site. The structure on the site, and you should probably interview Craig and Scott to get the full story there, but Craig and Scott had managed to obtain a long-term lease, and in return for them renovating the building, and they've renovated the building, and it is unbelievable. And so that's where we shot the video.
You've managed to capture so much in detail about the place just with this long series of panning shots. How long does it take to set up something like that?
It takes some time. You need to wait. You know, you can fudge photography a little bit. Video is less so. So you really need to get the right light at the right moment. It takes probably to do a good video shoot takes about twice as long as doing a still photo shoot.
Are you a fan of Wes Anderson?
Oh, I love Wes Anderson.
Yeah, he likes those.
Yeah, those long panning shots. I wish I had his sense of humor. Oh, man, he's incredible.
This new book coming out, when will it be available?
The new book is coming out in April of 2024.
Oh, wonderful. Well, we can't wait to see it. Thanks so much for joining us, Michael. Can't wait to see you again in New Canaan sometime.
Thanks, guys. Good to talk to you.
Russell Brown is a Los Angeles-based filmmaker whose most recent feature is Lauren and Rose, starring Jacqueline Bisset. He is also the founder of Friends of Residential Treasures, or Fort LA, an organization that brings people together to celebrate the history and influence of residential architecture. Fort publishes popular guided and self-guided tours online and is the recipient of preservation awards from the LA Conservancy and the California Preservation Foundation. A man after our own modernist hearts, here's Russell Brown talking with George on Zoom.
Russell, my first question, I don't ask this very often, but what year were you born?
I was born in 1976.
Okay, because
I'm glad you asked, because it means I guess I'm doing okay.
it seems like you stepped in the hot tub time machine and gone back to 1974, because the range of celebrities and actors and actresses you have pulled into your films, like, all have 1974 something in common. I was astounded to find out that you were working with Paul Sand, who's now in his 90s.
Wow.
His TV show premiered in the fall of 1974. I watched every episode. It was called Paul Sand and Friends and Lovers. It only lasted 4 months. It was one of Mary Tyler Moore's few failures as a producer of comedy series. But Paul was just a genius. I mean, how did you rediscover him and get him to work with you in your film?
I'm so glad you brought that up. And I'd love to send you the film if you're curious to see him, because Paul's actually really wonderful in the movie. And I actually knew Paul kind of socially, and I'd been at a party at the casting director's house. And I just remembered Paul from that party. And then years later, when we started working on this movie, we were thinking about who to cast in this kind of small but really pivotal role. And I mentioned Paul. And he was the only person we ever thought of for the part. We sent him the script. He said he would do it. And he ended up really being an important part of the whole process, because Jacqueline Bisset felt very close to Paul. I think on set, she always kind of turned to him. She felt she had a friend there with her. And so the sort of chemistry that they have on screen really played out with what was going on set.
Jacqueline Bisset, 1975, The Deep. Karen Black, 1975, Trilogy of Terror. I mean, you really sucked it into that little 18-month period of time.
No, I sort of kind of have this thing going in my movie-making career where I write parts, and I this isn't really intentional, it just keeps happening, that I think are pretty good parts for, actresses in that sort of age range. And so I've worked twice with Karen Black and Jacqueline and Sybil Shepherd and Connie Stevens, and I don't know why it keeps happening, but it does.
Karen Black was in a movie, Trilogy of Terror, where she played multiple roles, and she was chased around by this little African statue. That horrified me for months when I first saw that. That was a very scary film.
Well, I have a story about the Zuni doll, if you want to hear it.
Yeah.
I was over at Karen and I ended up being very, very close friends. And I was over at her house one day, and I walked in and she had this table by the door. And I was like, Karen, is that the Zuni doll from Trilogy of Terror? And she's like, yeah. And I said, what's it doing here? And she's like, I just sort of kept it. Do you want it? And I was like, Karen, this is like a treasured piece of like film propage. I can't take this from you. you could sell this on eBay for tens of thousands of dollars. And she was like, really? And I said, yeah, like that Zuni doll has a huge meaning to a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
And so I don't know what happened to it, but.
Okay. And that was a while back because she passed away in what, 2013?
I think that's right.
Well, enough about Hollywood. Let's talk about architecture. How did you start this group, Fort LA, and what does it stand for?
So it stands for Friends of Residential Treasures Los Angeles. And how it started was I'm a native Angelino, and a lot of my films that we've been talking about, are set in Los Angeles, and I've made documentaries that are sort of take place in Los Angeles. And I felt that I kept coming across this phenomenon where people who lived here and also people who sort of visited the city or talked about the city had no real knowledge of the architectural legacy and sort of the great architecture that exists in LA. There was always this kind of joke that LA has no architecture and, it's the city of strip malls. And that really bothered me because I'm an architecture fan and I love my hometown. And so I started to think about how there's a lot of great preservation groups in LA and how to sort of create a program or a series of programs that really celebrate and make kind of accessible in a fun way the architectural legacy and history of LA.
Well, I think the way to sell all of this is to get people to have fun, right? Get people to enjoy the architecture.
Totally. That was a big thing is like, how do we get people, and that's, for our trails, we have these curators every month. And how do we get people to see the architecture through their eyes? How do we get people to sort of tap into the passion that these historians or architects are bringing to their work? So that's like a key part of these trails that we create is tapping into the expertise and passion and excitement of our curators.
The trails and the maps of the trails are a huge feature of your website. How do people use those?
Well, the trails, have sort of two components. There's what we call the destination pages, and that's where the curators choose 5 stops that represent the theme of the trail. And they write like a paragraph or two that sort of explains why that house is a great demonstration of the theme of the trail. And then once we get those 5 stops from the curator, our research team puts together sort of a deep dive of information from a whole bunch of sources, like U.S. Modernist, quite often. And
thank you.
So that when people are driving around or reading the trails on their own, they have the kind of information about the house at their fingertips also. So Those are the Discovery Center pages.
What are some of your most popular trails?
Well, by far, our most popular trail, every Halloween, we do a trail called Witch Houses.
Okay.
It's become like an annual thing now about witch houses, which is really kind of storybook architecture. And it's curated by Amber Benson, who has written a series of novels about the witches of Echo Park. And she was on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She played Tara McClay. And so the witch house trails have become like a really fun way for people to kind of take their kids out on Halloween and do something that's kind of educational, but sort of appropriate to the season.
Yeah.
So that one was really popular. I think actually our recent trail called Stilts on Screen about stilts houses really kind of picked up a lot of press attention, and people were really excited because there's always this kind of, what are those stilt houses? And, people drive around the city and they're kind of unsure of what they are. And so I think the stilts houses really got a lot of people excited. There's a trail that's sort of my favorite that I always refer people to called Casciato Walks Carmelina. And Maristello Casciato chose 5 houses on one street in LA, and she wrote about the relationship of trees and the architecture, the trees on the street and then the architecture behind them. So it was really this kind of exploration of nature and architecture and how they're talking to each other, how they're not talking to each other. So I sort of love that trail.
And are these walking trails? Are they driving trails? What are they exactly?
They're mostly driving trails. Some of them are walking trails, like Katie Horak from Architectural Resources Group.
Oh, sure. I know Katie. Yeah.
Yeah. So Katie did a great trail about View Park, and that's like a great walk. That's like a super nice walking trail. And we did a trail on Kings Road and sort of the history of Kings Road and the different sort of styles of architecture on Kings Road and why they represented kind of different eras. And that's pretty much a walking trail. Susan Morgan curated that trail. So most of them require a drive, but some of them you can walk.
Now, do you have special events like where you have your own tours or gatherings of members of the public?
Yeah, so we have 4 programs, and the trails are sort of our main program, but we also have another program called Fort Gatherings. Those are sort of both virtual and in-person events. But we've done a lot of things. I think our most popular in-person event was called Hollyhock Hot Dog. When the Hollyhock House reopened, Fort brought a hot dog stand to the Hollyhock House, and I think it really helped kind of draw attention to the reopening of the Hollyhock House, and it was kind of a catchy phrase. And
I love that.
Yeah, so it was a little less educational than a lot of our events, but it was kind of a fun celebration.
Well, I got to get on your mailing list more often because somehow I missed the Hollyhock hot dog.
Hollyhock hot dog. I know it's a tongue twister.
You have been great about capturing documentation on these houses all the time, which I know is really helpful, and educating people that it's important to save these houses in Los Angeles because, as we all know, a lot of houses get bought that are in fine condition and then torn down. Has your organization been able to assist in saving any modernist houses?
I always think of us as preservation adjacent.
Mm-hmm.
And I think really how Fort intersects with preservation is if we can kind of bring the awareness to these houses. You know, a lot of times what happens, and this is actually playing out right now in a big way in LA with this Marilyn Monroe house, is that these houses sort of are off the radar, and then somebody buys them and the knockdown permit is issued and it becomes this huge rush to try and save the house. But I think if there was more awareness, kind of people in their neighborhoods knew that there was this amazing house around the corner with this amazing history. If there was kind of more knowledge and appreciation, and the city itself, Los Angeles isn't great about celebrating what's great about Los Angeles in a way. And I think that if the city got better about knowing what's here and what a valuable asset this great architecture is, the preservation argument would be a lot easier and it'd be a lot faster, and it would happen before these moments of crisis.
Well, what's wonderful is that besides sharing all this information about the houses and the trails and the maps and everything, is you also make short films about the houses. I watched a couple of them today.
Thanks. I mean, so we have our third program is called Fort Frames. And the idea, you know, when we were coming up with our programs, getting inside the houses was a big deal to people, you know, and most of these houses are privately owned, so they're inaccessible. So we collaborate with artists to go into houses and to sort of create projects based on their time inside a house to kind of give our audience sort of a feeling for what it's like to be inside. So I've done a number of documentaries because I'm a filmmaker, but we've also done things like we brought in a mixologist and he created a new cocktail based on his time in the W.C. Fields house. And
oh, yeah.
We brought in a couple of people to create playlists. So like Liza Richardson, who's a really well-known DJ and music curator in Los Angeles, she went to a Buff and Hensman house and she spent 2 hours there and she put together a series of songs that were in her mind as she was experiencing the architecture. So we're trying to give people the feeling of the architecture without actually going inside through these collaborations with artists.
What other events do you have during the year that people can attend, Russell?
Well, our annual fundraiser, you know, not to do a big pitch for raising money, but we do a fundraiser in October every year. And this year it's at the George Elling Mosaic House, which is an incredible Gothic mansion in Hollywood. And George Elling, who was a mosaic artist, spent his entire life covering this house in tiles and his beautiful kind of mosaic work. And then throughout the year, we run a fellowship program where we give grants to mostly academics to do research and to do papers on topics that interest them. We did one about post-war Japanese American architects. We did one about an early housing advocate in LA named Mary Louise Schmidt. And we did one about Myron Hunt, 5 houses that Myron Hunt designed. Sort of a filmmaker went in and documented these houses. And we usually do events that sort of come with the completion of one of these fellowship projects. So we did a conversation with the scholars who researched Mary Louise Schmidt in person. We did 2 in-person talks about Myron Hunt. Those were all open to the public. We did them at in collaboration with Pasadena Heritage and the Pasadena Museum of History. So generally, a lot of the in-person events that we're doing are to kind of celebrate the culmination of these long fellowship projects that we give grants to people to do.
Well, you are really doing great work. And on behalf of U.S. Modernist, I just can't thank you enough for your energy and initiative, because I know it takes a lot of time to do this, doesn't it?
You and I don't know if this is, you and George and I were joking at the beginning of this about how these projects end up completely taking over your entire life. And, I think there's a little bit of that going on with me, but it's so much fun. And I love contributing to the city and seeing people become aware of this amazing heritage that we have.
The website is fortla, fortla.org. You can go on there, you can get on the mailing list, you can see these different segments of the nonprofit's organization on there. You can sort of dive deep into any of these. Thank you, Russell.
Thanks, George.
Lenore Raphael is an internationally renowned jazz pianist, Steinway artist, radio host, and inspiring teacher. Splitting time between Cary, North Carolina, and New York City, she is acclaimed as one of the best jazz pianists today. With 10 albums to her credit on the Swingin' Fox music label, she records and tours frequently with Howard Alden. He's a jazz guitarist from Newport Beach, California, who's recorded many albums for Concord, including several with 7-string guitar innovator George Van Epps. Together, they released the album Loverly in 2012 after meeting on Lenore's radio show Jazz Spot. From the Sharp 9 Jazz Club in Durham, North Carolina, here's George's conversation with Lenore Raphael and Howard Alden.
It is so delightful to be here with the two of you and hear the two of you playing. And this is not the first time that has happened. When did you first play together?
Oh, gosh, it's been, I think it was like 2008 or 9 or something like that.
Sounds correct.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah.
And where was it?
In New York City.
Was it California?
Yeah.
One of those coasts.
One of those two.
Somewhere in the United States.
Either coast.
And you're doing regular gigs with each other, right?
Much as we can.
As much as you can.
As regular as you can.
Even though you're living apart.
Yes.
Howard, you're in Phoenix,
I'm in
right?
Phoenix now, yes.
Okay.
We've never lived together.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
You have recorded together. You performed together.
Correct.
And tonight we're here at the Sharp 9 Gallery Club in Durham, North Carolina. Tell me about this song that you're going to play.
It's from My Fair Lady, and it's called Wouldn't It Be Lovely?
Loverly, yes. I know that word never really caught on into the English language except in that song, I think.
Correct.
Yeah.
You say that and people think of the song immediately.
Immediately.
Nothing else.
True.
That's right.
Immediately.
But Oscar Peterson made a very swinging record of it years ago, and Lenore does her very swinging version herself that I am happy to play along with.
Well, here's Howard and Lenore with Wouldn't It Be Loverly? As sure as the rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain. Thank you both. That was great. Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by June Goldfinger and Jeff Taylor, sponsors of Circle, Square, Triangle, a traveling exhibition on the architecture of Myron Goldfinger, and by Diane Bald and the Budman family, restoring significant architecture in Toronto, Malibu, Los Angeles, and Palm Springs. Okay, Tom, take us out.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 20,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4.3 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song was performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Kelly Policelli handles guest research. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I will be back soon with another jazzy edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.
Just get in the damn car and start driving around.